Casual Birder podcast, a weekly podcast for people interested in the birds they find around them. I'm Susie Buttress. As a casual birder, I enjoy seeing birds as I go about my daily life. Each week, I'll talk about a bird-watching moment I've had, feature particular birds I've seen, or interview others about their experiences. This week, the featured birds are wrens. The Eurasian Wren, commonly known as just the wren, that's found all over Europe, and the house wren and Bewick's wren that I saw in California. And a special mention is given to the Superb Fairy-Wren, seen in eastern Australia. One particularly sunny day this week, I decided I would actually leave my office desk and take a walk around the car park at lunchtime. It only takes me a few minutes to walk from my car into the office building in the morning, but on that day I'd heard robins singing, great tits calling out, and a woodpecker in the big conifers surrounding the car park. As I entered the building, I promised myself that I would get outside again at lunchtime. I hadn't done this for quite a few weeks, and I was keen to see what birds might be around now that summer is fading and we are moving into more autumnal days. I also recognise that getting up from my desk and walking around outside is good for me, both mentally and physically. So it's late August and I realise it's a long time since I've been out to talk about the birds that I'm seeing at lunchtime here at work. I've come out to the sink pond area and I can see that the water lilies are in flower. That's really pretty because I've never noticed that before. There's still a lot of work going on the surrounding area, so you'll probably hear machinery. And it's a mild day. When the sun's out from behind the clouds, it's actually quite warm, but it's nowhere near as hot as it has been. So as I approached the pond, I could hear some great tits. You might just hear some flies buzzing around because there seems to be a lot of flies. Great tits are a small bird, probably about the size of large plum, typically black head with white cheeks, a large black stripe down the front of their chests, and yellowy breasts with olive green backs and wings. It's a little bit breezy and the rushes are all moving in the wind. Trying to listen for any other bird noise, but at the moment all I can hear is machinery. But it's jolly pleasant standing here in the warm, just taking a moment to watch the reflections on the surface of the water, see the ripples. There's a few, I don't know if they're hawkers or dragonflies flying around the water lily flowers. So one of the sad things to report this week is that I noticed 2 greenfinches in the garden that were clearly poorly on different days. I noticed the first one towards the end of the week, and it was displaying all the symptoms of that disease that I can't pronounce, tricho something, but the one where they have real difficulty swallowing and yet they're still trying to eat, and it's quite contagious. And so if they drop any food on the ground around the feeders and other birds eat it, it's easily passed on. So the advice from most bird organisations, especially the BTO, is to stop feeding for about 2 weeks and to remove any water from the garden. So I did that over the weekend. That bird unfortunately got taken by a magpie, so I knew that that bird was no longer in the garden. But then at the weekend I saw a second greenfinch. Both of them were juveniles, still showing juvenile plumage. And so, having seen the second bird, I knew I was definitely going to have to act. So I took all the feeders away, cleaned the bird baths, emptied them out. And that was actually quite difficult to do because, of course, the birds have been used to coming to the garden to get water and to get food. So I stopped that for a day. But then I saw another BTO leaflet or advice note that said if birds are used to coming to the garden and were looking for food and water, You could put it out, but you had to be really, really careful with cleanliness. So I've refilled one of the water bowls, because the other thing is we've got hedgehogs in the garden, and I was conscious I had been providing water for them. So for them to not have water was, I didn't feel I could do that either. So I've put one water bowl back, and I've just put out one suet block, but I've moved that to a different area of the garden, so it's not in an area where there's previous food on the floor. And then I've put out just a small handful of seeds each morning because of the partridge that's still coming to the garden, to allow her to find some food. But it's a very small handful, so it's enough that it will go in a couple of hours. And then what I'll do is really carefully monitor the birds in the garden to see if there's any more signs of illness. I haven't seen the second sick bird again in the last few days. It could already have died or been taken by a magpie. But that's another reason for coming out this afternoon and having a little wander around here, because it's really hard looking out the window and seeing the birds come to the garden expecting to find food, and there's no food there. So I'm at the moment not looking out the window too much, just checking that there's no sick birds around. With the sick birds, it's quite easy to spot them. In previous years I've had collared doves also suffering from this disease, so they look very fluffed up. They don't react to you being out in the garden until the last minute, so they'll just be quite lethargic looking, look like they're sleepy, puffed up, and you can see that they keep trying to eat but they can't manage it, and they seem to be swallowing, but then they seem to have difficulty swallowing, and it's quite heartbreaking to see. And I don't think they live very long once they're at that stage, especially as they're not noticing predators coming into the garden. On a lighter note, it's still very pretty looking at the pink water lilies here and the reflections on the water. It's just a gentle breeze. The sun's warm. Been really quiet for birds though. There was one bird that turned up a little bit earlier, but I missed what it was. So I'm just now going to continue for a walk around the site and see what else might be around. The other night I caused some interest to someone leaving work as I was standing at the edge of the car park peering intently into the woods, because I could hear a bird calling that I didn't recognise, and I was trying to record it. And when I realised I was being observed, I went over and spoke to the person. But I did go back to look to see what this... There were several birds calling and I just didn't recognise it. Almost felt familiar, but not quite. And eventually I saw them, and it was 4 bullfinches, 3 juveniles and an adult. So I was glad I persevered and looked out for them. Anyway, we'll just have a quick wander around and see if we see anything else. So I've just noticed a wood pigeon landing in a tree that I'm approaching. I've seen the wood pigeons a few times this morning. And aha! So I heard a flock of pigeons take off and look up to see a buzzard circling overhead, and that had clearly freaked out all the pigeons that were sitting on the roof. So they're flying around, but the buzzard is just doing some lazy circles. He's not interested in them from the looks of it. And there's a second buzzard soaring really high up, so if we're lucky they might call out. The one that's really high up is calling. What I'd really like is this one that's lower down to call. No, he's headed off, so we didn't get any calls from him. A couple of wood pigeon in the tree above me. They were calling briefly just now but have stopped, probably because I'm standing here looking at them. So I mentioned what wood pigeons look like a couple of episodes ago, but they're large, stocky birds. I would say the size of honeydew melon, mostly a grey-blue colour with white edges to the wings and white collars, or rather white patches towards the back of the neck. It doesn't actually join at the back, and on the side of the neck you'll see iridescent purple and green. And now they're being resolutely quiet and not calling. I can still in the background hear the buzzard, but unfortunately it's not calling here. So buzzard is a large bird of prey. So in America I know that vultures are often referred to as buzzards, but this is actually a type of, it's a buteo, a type of hawk. one of our largest birds of prey, sometimes called the Englishman's eagle, because when we go to Scotland and we look out for golden eagles, you can sometimes see buzzards, and if you're not familiar with seeing birds of prey, think that you've seen an eagle because they are quite large looking, but when you see an eagle you definitely see the difference in size. So there's lots of berries on the plants now, hips on the wild roses, and the rowan berries are all out. Just heard a sort of scratching noise, looked up to see a squirrel running way up the top of a conifer. I don't know why he's spooked by me. There's no way I can get up that conifer to chase him. Another wood pigeon just flew in. I think over the last few years they seem to be one of the more frequent birds. We never used to get them in the garden. Now we get them quite a lot. Something giving a sharp call out here. I think it's a robin. Yep, I can see it through the... Oh, there you go, it's calling out as well. It's actually a second robin calling in the background, so I'm guessing that they are proclaiming their territories. Sort of like dueling robins. I'll leave them to it, don't want to disturb them too much. I'll try and do a lunchtime walk more frequently. If you're able to get outside for a short walk this week, do let me know on Twitter what birds you see. Use the hashtag CBPod44. That's hashtag CBPod44. A quick note about regions. I live in England, and this podcast will primarily feature birds found in the UK. However, I've been lucky enough to vacation in other countries around the world, and will discuss birds from those countries in my podcasts. I also have listeners from around the world, and I welcome birding comments or questions from all. I'll feature some of these in each podcast. The descriptions in this podcast have come from my observations over the years. If you want further information, there are various sites online that are worth checking out, such as rspb.org.uk for British birds, audubon.org for North American birds, or birdsinbackyards.net for Australian birds. Wrens are reportedly Britain's most common bird, but as they are generally quite secretive, you may be more likely to hear one than see one. Over the last couple of weeks, I've particularly noticed a wren singing in my garden, and last week I tried to take a photograph of one in my apple tree. When looking more closely at the photograph later, I found it was a fledgling with yellow sides to its gape. I'm so pleased to know that there was a successful nest close to my garden. The wren is a tiny bird, smaller than a sparrow, about the size of a small plum. I've read that they weigh the same as a pound coin, just 10 grams. Eurasian wrens are quite widespread and are found all over Europe, across Northern Asia and into Japan. It's the only wren species found outside North America, and they are a bird of woodland, parks and gardens. From a distance, wrens look like little brown golf balls with a stubby upright tail. If you're lucky enough to get a closer view, you'll see they have delicate darker brown patterns on the wings, sides and tail, a buff throat and underbelly, and a pale eye stripe. All of this helps to camouflage the bird in the dense undergrowth that they favour. Males and females look alike. The beak is short and thin, ideal for picking out insects from crevices. These tiny birds are quite secretive, until they call out. For a small bird, they have a big voice. In the spring, they might be seen sitting on a prominent perch, singing. Often, they are one of the first birds singing in the morning, declaring their territories. Their song is extremely loud, a series of repeated notes with a trill near the end. Another sound you might hear is the alarm call, which is a repeated chit-chit noise. That can be repeated for quite long periods, and I found that even if you're not looking for wrens when out walking, the alarm call demands your attention. You may not see the bird, but you will certainly hear it. Wrens are not easy to spot as they tend to stay amongst the dense foliage or undergrowth. I've most often noticed them as they pop out into the open, hopping along the base of a garden fence or through some ivy, searching out the spiders and insects. Because they stay low to the ground and search in short bursts of activity, I've sometimes thought I'm catching sight of a mouse before I realise it's a wren. Their flight is direct, with their short rounded wings moving rapidly. Wrens nest in holes in tree trunks or banks, but they've also been known to nest in boxes designed for tits. As they are such small birds, they are vulnerable to the cold weather, and they may roost with others in nest boxes during the winter to keep warm. Wrens have a long history in folklore, and harming a wren is said to bring bad luck. And they were part of the public's consciousness when they appeared on the British farthing from 1937 until the coins were phased out in 1960. Next time you are in woodland, or sitting in a garden with lots of ivy or undergrowth, keep a watch for these little birds, and you may just see one exploring the nooks and crannies looking for insects. You can hear more about wrens that I've seen in the Trondheim Birdwalk episode and the Goldcrest episode, where I saw 7 or 8 of them along the coastal path in Swanage, all searching among the grasses for food. I've only ever seen them singly before, or maybe an adult with a fledgling. So it was interesting to see such a large group, hear the little peeps as they kept in touch with each other, and see the grass move as they wandered through it. While there are many species in the wren family in North America, I'll focus on the 2 types that I've seen: the house wren, which is from the same genus as the Eurasian wren, and the Bewick's wren, which is a different genus but still a member of the wren family. And both of these were seen on my trips to California. I saw the house wren on my recent trip to Los Angeles. After speaking with Camille from Coyote Kids and going on a birdwalk with her in Elysian Park, featured in a previous episode, I continued my walk alone to see what other birds I could find. I noticed some calls coming from a shrub as I walked along the path, and I stopped and watched as 3 or 4 birds sat prominently, jostling for position and calling out. While these were larger than the wren that I'm familiar with, the soft brown colouring, the strong song, and the barred brown tail markings made me think that these were wrens of some kind. I watched them for a short while and got some photos and videos. Unfortunately, because they were in a shrub, my camera focused on the branches rather than the bird. Luckily, the Merlin Bird app on my phone helped me identify them while they were in front of me. It can be tempting to rely on looking at photos later rather than identifying the bird in the field. The house wren is a small brown bird with a longish beak and longish tail, mainly light brown underparts with buff throat and grey-brown upperparts. The wings and tail have darker brown barring. The legs are a pinky brown, and males and females look alike. House wrens are widespread across the United States, and their breeding range extends north into southern Canada and south into Mexico. They migrate to southern states and Mexico in the winter. They're often found in suburban locations as well as woodland and thickets, and they'll readily come into gardens. House wrens eat insects, spiders and other bugs. They have a strong trilling song. A few years ago, we were lucky enough to stay for a week in a cottage on a hilltop overlooking the Pacific Ocean at Big Sur in California. One of the birds present in the grounds of the cottage was a Bewick's wren. It was busy building a nest near the front door while we were there, but luckily we were able to use the patio door to enter the building, so we were able to avoid disturbing it. We thought it was a wren because of the cocked tail and barred markings, which were reminiscent of our wrens in the UK. However, it was larger, and it had a characteristic not seen in our wrens. It flicked its tail from side to side. Bewick's wrens are found in the west, from Vancouver down to Baja, California, and in the southern states as far east as the Mississippi River. They prefer brushy or woody habitats and undergrowth in oak or pine woodlands. They're also found in suburban areas. A sparrow-sized bird, reddish-brown above and greyish-buff below, with a prominent pale eye stripe. The tail is long and appears broad, with a darker brown barred pattern. Again, the males and females look alike. They have a long, thin, pointed beak which they use to prise insects out of crevices. Like the other wrens, insects and spiders make up the bulk of their diet, though they will also occasionally eat berries. They have a loud song which has trilling sections. Unfortunately, I didn't get any good recordings of the Bewick's wren, but you can listen to a variety of their calls on the Audubon website. One other bird I want to mention this week is the Superb Fairy-Wren, which we saw in the hills west of Brisbane when we visited Australia a few years ago. This is not a true wren, but it has been given the name because it shares characteristics with the wrens of the Northern Hemisphere, in particular its small rounded shape and the habit of cocking its tail vertically. This is one of the birds I had hoped to see in Australia, and I wasn't disappointed. Found in southeastern Australia and Tasmania, the males of this little bird have a stunning blue colour when in breeding plumage. The crown, cheeks and upper back are sky blue, while the nape, throat and lower back are black, and there's also a dark stripe running through the eye from the nape to the throat. Females and juveniles have brown upper parts and tail and are pale underneath. In non-breeding plumage, the males retain the dark blue tail, but lose the other blue feathers and look similar to the females. They live in small social groups and eat insects and spiders. One video I took in Tasmania showed a male superb fairy-wren catching a grasshopper and thrashing it on a rock before eating it. This is the same bird calling shortly afterwards. I'd love to know what birds you've seen this week. Heather, host of Sunshine and Power Cuts podcast, lives in New Zealand. She shared a video of a singing tui that she saw while out on a walk, enjoying the nature around her. And Esther from Chicago shared a photograph of a group of gulls in a car park. Esther said she was surprised to see so many gulls so far inland. I'm not an expert at gull identification, but these look to be ring-billed gulls, which are found all over America. The key characteristics that helped me with this identification were that a dark band or ring could be seen near the tip of the beak, and young birds appeared to have pink legs and feet, whilst the adults had yellow legs and feet, a feature of ring-billed gulls shown in my field guide to North American birds. And according to the Audubon website, ringed-billed gulls may often be seen resting in parking lots. So there you go. Thank you to Heather and Esther for sharing these sightings. And don't forget, if you do take a short walk this week, let me know on Twitter what birds you see, and use the hashtag CBPod44. Join our Facebook group to discuss this week's episode, or post your photos of the birds you've seen. I really do enjoy hearing your tales, so come and join the conversation there. Find us at facebook.com/groups/Casual Birder Podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Casual Birder Pod or on Instagram at Casual Birder Podcast. And you can email me at casualbirderpod@gmail.com. Make sure you don't miss any episodes by subscribing to the show. Subscribing is free and you can do it wherever you listen to the show, and that makes sure you're alerted to all the new episodes. And please consider leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. This helps other people find the show. You can also help the show by retweeting any news about the podcast. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. And check out their website at www.dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder Podcast.